Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charles van der Walt. I'm the Global Head for Security Research at Orange Cyber Defense. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. Very excited about the conversation we're going to have, which is the first one in a series of conversations we'll be having about our annual 2026 Security Navigator report. The Navigator, as you may know, is our annual security report covering a range of topics over almost 100 pages of content and out in bookshops now. So use the QR code, use the link, download it. We're going to be talking about only one small part of it, which is some data that we released this year for the first time. About the efforts of global law enforcement to disrupt cybercrime. And to that end, I am joined by a prestigious group of acclaimed experts, most of them very good friends and colleagues of mine. I'm going to start with Zora Hamila, who's a junior security researcher, focused over the last few months on cyber extortion and law enforcement. Joining us from Norway is the Chief Technology Officer of our Norway operations, Bjorn Rasmussen. Bjorn, also ex-law enforcement himself, but a very accomplished practitioner, so he'll be able to bring multiple perspectives to our conversation. And then our senior researcher responsible for our work on cyber extortion and law enforcement is Diana Salk-Paulsen. Diana and Zora both join us from Sweden, although Diana is German and Zora is French. I want to take a moment to note also that Diana will be taking an extended sabbatical after this webinar. So Diana, thanks again for all your hard work and your incredible contributions that you've made to our research over the last few years. We're going to miss you while you're away, but excited for you to come back fresh and energized. And then I'm very excited to introduce Paul Alexander Gillois, who is the head of the EC3 and JCAT team at Europol. Paul is an expert in cybercrime and combating cybercrime, and the perfect person to join us in today's conversation. So Paul, I wonder if I could give you a minute just to say a little bit about yourself, your team, and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Char. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm currently in charge of the JCAT, so the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force at Europol EC3. And basically the mandate of our agency, Europol, is to support every investigations related to organized crime, and especially for my center in cyber, when we have at least 2 member states that are affected. So as a matter of fact, it's mainly also supporting the biggest cyber extortion cases. And the task force itself is comprised of 19 countries at the moment and 23 agencies that are basically the most active in the fight against cybercrime. That's, well, in a nutshell, what I'm doing, and I'm really pleased to join you today. Thank you.
Well, Paul, thank you. And thank you for the incredible work you and your teams do. And one of the reasons we started this research is because of the notable increase in levels of activity we've observed from you, and the very intriguing creative approaches that you've surfaced. As we're very much looking forward to this conversation, very grateful that you're here. To the people that are joining us, I forgot to mention that today's session will be a conversation between me and Paul and the other experts. But we'd love for you to join that conversation by posting comments and questions in the questions pane. We will do our best to complete our conversation in the first 50 minutes, and then to leave 10 minutes for questions at the end. But please post your questions as soon as they come to your mind, because perhaps we can work them into the conversation and try and address them as we go along. And then for those of you who are super interested in what we're talking about and just dying to get your questions answered, The panelists have agreed to stay on for an extra 10 minutes after the end of the session. So we'll finish on the hour, and then we'll have 10 more minutes that we can continue the conversation a little bit longer for those of you who may be interested. So I'm going to take the liberty of kicking off with my own very poor summary of one of the data sets that we discuss in this year's Navigator, and it's the data set that we're primarily interested in discussing today, which is a unique project led by Diana, supported by Zora, in which since 2021, or going back to 2021, we started collecting publicly available reports of law enforcement efforts to counter cybercrime. We looked at a variety of factors. We looked at who the agency was, in which country they're based, what kind of cybercrime was being targeted, what kind of action law enforcement took, whether that's arrests, indictments, sanctions, disruptions, etc. And then for about half of those cases, we were also able to deduce something about the attributes of the offender, the nationality, the age, the gender, etc. And in total, we have gathered just a little over 500 such incidents dating back to 2021, as we said. And most of those are in the report, although we have added a little since that report. There's a total of 418 in the report. And the thing that jumps out to you, the first thing that jumps out to you when you look at the data, and then I think it should be clear in this slide, is just how the incidents of, or the reports of law enforcement activity have accelerated since we started collecting the data. Now, of course, that may mean that cybercrime is accelerating. It may mean that law enforcement efforts to counter cybercrime are accelerating, or of course, it could just mean that reports about such efforts are becoming more common. So Paul, I wonder if we could start with a question to you on exactly that point. This apparent increase, this sort of prominence of publicly reported law enforcement efforts to disrupt cybercrime, what do you attribute that to? Are we seeing the real picture? What's the story there?
I think, the trend is right. To be honest, I think it's so again a mix of both, in a sense that we indeed supported more operations over the past years. Right now, if we look at the latest figures, from Europol side, approximately 150 cases are supported, let's say, last year. Of course, the support may vary depending on the prioritization, and resources put for each can differ. But in general, there are definitely more, let's say, operations being led and by the law enforcement agencies in that field. Although why we have that, because definitely like the international coordination is key to kind of take the whole scope, in a sense that we are really trying to utilize the best framework of every country in order to maximize the impact of every law enforcement action. And before that, it was sometimes just aiming at a classic infrastructure takedown. And previous example shown that nowadays not as efficient as it used to be a few years ago. So we need also to adapt. So hence this need actually for an extra international coordination. But on top of that, we are also seeing an increase in like how actually the law enforcement agencies, and together also with Europol, are communicating around these action days. Before, it used to be quite, let's say, quiet. They were on bubble. It was also around the secrecy of the criminal investigations. But as mentioned, trying to find also the best way to maximize the effect of an action day, for instance. We used to incorporate new things such as, for instance, prevention, and namely also especially offender prevention that was used in Operation Endgame, Operation Kronos, or Eastwood, trying to address directly also the affiliates and some specific actors and trying to prevent them first to continue that again, especially for the youngest generation, but also to create distrust amongst groups. So this, let's say, requires a lot of publicity and publicly also campaign from law enforcement. That's why you are seeing maybe more, let's say, advertisement and let's say sometimes now websites displaying law enforcement action, specific information being released, also with the approval of the judicial authorities, of course. But this is also part of this new strategy, trying to get also this, let's say, part of the action done.
So you mentioned Operation Kronos, Operation Endgame. You don't have to tell me this as if it's an operational secret, but do you actually have professional communications specialists, marketers on the team that help you put together those very sophisticated visibility aspects to these operations?
So as a matter of fact, yes, now, but it's quite new, to be honest. We've seen this change. At the beginning, it was quite handmade, pushed also by either some manager or lead investigators, and nowadays it's totally different. On Europol side, for instance, we hired like a specialist on offender prevention side. We are supported also by a lot of different colleagues, mainly in this, let's say, for the media and the strategy around the media part. And also in the countries, it's the same. They are also using a specific platforms, such as, for instance, the Intercop project, that is an internal security funds, let's say, project that gather the countries that wants to really act on the offender prevention side, and they are sharing knowledge, competencies, and expertise regarding how to best, let's say, address directly to these specific, let's say, criminals, and trying to change, let's say, and their mind, and to build again distrust among the groups. So this is now really something that is, let's say, becoming more and more professional. But again, we are really starting this. It's quite new, so we'll also be looking closely at the effect that it has on the future operation.
Paul, thank you. And we're going to come back to examine this diversity of mechanisms that law enforcement has begun bringing to bear. I want to turn to you, if I may, Diana. You know, one of the unique perspectives that you've brought to our team over these years is that you're a qualified, trained criminologist, which incidentally is not someone who studies how to do crime. It's somebody who studies crime itself. So in terms of like the theory of law enforcement, what is, you know, apart from the numbers that we're looking at, what are the goals? How do you express the goals of law enforcement operations like this, especially when they don't actually or necessarily result in a player ending up in prison, for example?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting what Paul was saying, and I think it's what we're seeing as well, but I think it's not very often talked about because we are, especially in our industry in IT security, we're very much into statistics, right, and numbers. But I think there's also like in between layers that you can't really measure, and I think one of the things is the concept of deterrence, and I think that's what Paul also touched upon now, is that, you know, the activities that we see by law enforcement kind of signal, you know, that cyberspace isn't a lawless space, right? They're signaling that they're there and that they're watching. And I think that's it's quite powerful. And, you know, while we don't maybe see direct correlation or results in like a decrease of, you know, overall attacks or crime, we definitely see uncertainty and doubt. And in that, we see that through friction and fragmentation. So we will actually be talking about this a bit later today, so I'm not gonna like linger too much on this, but, you know, with cyber extortion, for example, we see a lot of threat actors that kind of appear and disappear and rebrand, and they have extremely short lifespan, and it kind of feels actually like they running, you know, they on the run, and they can't linger too long, and it's extremely difficult from our perspective, from a research perspective, to observe them and, you know, to gain enough knowledge about them, because then they already disappear. But it shows kind kind of the dynamic and the mood a little bit, of course. And then our hope, of course, is that law enforcement actions kind of, and also us as defenders, actually, so all of us together, that we are increasing the cost to the offenders. And that can look like we like in terms of risk, right? So the risk taking that they have to accept is really high and is becoming higher. We see a lot of financially motivated crime. So then, to get the money out of the criminal ecosystem, to launder it out, is already difficult. We've seen activities in recent years that do address like cryptocurrency thermalers and mixers or exchanges to make it even more difficult. So that's really good. We do see individuals arrested. So that again signals back to the rest of the gang, hey, this comes with a consequence and a risk that you need to be willing to take. So again, I mean, the hope is that it signals something to threat actors. And that might not be measurable, but it definitely has an impact. So I would maybe, I don't know if that's an actual term, but I would maybe say, we're maybe looking at an ecosystem deterrence where you are starting to get unsure of engaging with this ecosystem and with the individuals. Because we've seen some actors kind of closing shops because the feds came to close and stuff like that. And by taking down things, even though there's not an immediate impact, a measurable impact, there's still that ecosystem and everyone engaging in it actually loses the trust in its own infrastructure. They can't be sure who they're talking to, who they're engaging to. And they depend so much on that ecosystem by buying access, by laundering the money, and by finding affiliates. So it's something that we should put into consideration for sure, but that can't really be measured in numbers.
And it's something you've been talking about for a while, isn't it? This idea that, the internet, cyberspace, dark web grants anonymity to offenders, to threat actors. But of course, it also means that they operate in a space where they're very vulnerable to, I suppose, being turned on by other criminals and threat actors. They don't really know who they are, and the ransomware as a service cyber extortion business model really requires that their affiliates and providers trust them. And I suppose, Paul, something you've noticed that as a vulnerability, and you've really been exploiting that. We'll talk about how effective that's been in a moment, but just in the interest of time, I want to, Diana, ask you about this data point from the Navigator, which expresses the kinds of criminal activity that we're seeing being targeted.
Yeah, I can walk us through real quick. So yeah, we were tracking criminal acts, and to our surprise, we saw cyber extortion actually being addressed the most by law enforcement over the years. This is great to hear and great to see, of course, because it's a topic that is on our on our minds, really.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just want to check, Paul, quickly. Would that resonate with you? Would you say that cyber extortion is the main priority within the JTA?
Yes, definitely. This is in line with what we are seeing indeed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Diana.
Glad to hear. And then we see in top 2, let me check. We see exactly. So when individuals are arrested, for example, if they've developed, if they distributed, if they installed malicious software, we see that actually on top 2. We see on top 3 when individuals gain access to systems and networks that they weren't allowed to do, so unauthorized access. And all those 3 top ones that I've just mentioned kind of show that the focus or the success, and that what's communicated to us, the public, is technical intrusions that has been successfully been done. The next one then is cyber espionage, and we didn't actually go too much into it in the report, but I've looked a little bit more now in preparation of this webinar, because then at the end I would want to know who's arrested or who's within the judicial system by the type of cyber espionage, and we connected it with nationality, and I guess it's not too much of a surprise that we see that the majority of offenders have either Chinese nationality, Russian, North Korean, or Iranian, which is the majority. We have other nationalities. We also have nationalities from the West, but most of them are actually from those nation states. And then the last one that I want to go into, which I find is super interesting, is the provision of criminal infrastructure. So that's kind of like the takedown announcements that we all been observing and reading about when a dark web marketplace or site gets taken down and seized, or when a hosting service gets sanctioned. And I think this is a really interesting one, and good to see also in the top 5, because those are the enablers of cybercrime, right? Without them, it wouldn't actually be possible. And therefore, it's actually good to see that law enforcement is focusing on that. And I can see, as Paul also mentioned in the beginning, with takedowns of this kind of infrastructure, again, the question, whether or not it's successful. And, we're all observing the space, and we're all seeing those news. And the latest is actually just 2 weeks ago, where significant action was done, and that was a takedown or seizure of the RAMP forum, which has been a Russian-speaking forum since several years, and it's widely used by especially people that engage in ransomware and extortion. So that was very significant, and I guess the challenge then again is to determine whether or not it's successful. And one story to that, or one twist, is actually that when it was taken down, one of the operators commented on another forum of cyber criminals, XXS. And XXS is a forum that was actually taken down last July, but came back in August. And that's kind of the dynamic, right? Like, you take down infrastructure and it pops back up in the case of XXS. But in the case of RAMP, so far, to my knowledge, the operator commented publicly and said, because of that action, years of my work has been destroyed, that person said. And that person is not intending to rebuild this forum. And that actually goes back to my previous point of deterrence and kind of demotivating those offenders, and also showing that there is risk to it. And that person actually acknowledged also, we always knew that there would be that risk, and now unfortunately it happened. So yeah, just to summarize the actions, and I think it is actually really important to keep taking down things, because at the end you will hopefully demotivate them.
But thanks, Donna. Paul, you were telling us that, of course, these operations, if I understand correctly, they start with a charge, right? There needs to be someone must bring a charge that a crime is being committed or has been committed, and then the investigation may unfold over time, and one thing may lead to another thing. So, for example, there's a question from Olivier in the chat now that says, an operation to dismantle, I don't know, ransomware as a service operation may then also lead to, or provide intelligence which leads to the seizure of other infrastructure. Does that a fair conceptualization? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So yeah, I think as you mentioned, I think the classical approach that every country faced, including, considering my accent, including France as well, is that usually it's always starts with like a victim, and usually it's like a victim company, for instance. Then there is like a complaint that is made, and criminal investigation started, and then the purpose of the law enforcement is through the course of this investigation to identify the actors behind. The problem is that this is working when you have not so many, let's say, cases to handle. But in this, let's say in the case of these huge groups or the affiliates that are using also the ransomware as a service, is like you have too many of them. So we need also to shift a little bit the strategy. That's what we've been doing over the past 3 years now. And it's basically developing a concept towards a more horizontal approach. So trying to figure out, yeah, you mentioned the ransomware as a service, the platform that they are using. The description of this might, again, possibly either discourage them, they would need to shift towards something else, but also we would gain more criminal intelligence around that. But not only this ransomware as a service platform, we are talking about also, as Diana mentioned, the forums like xss.is, like Rampos as well, where they are all discussing among each other, sharing like huge valuable intelligence that may lead to their identification. These, let's say, kind of investigations were not so common before, in a sense that, for instance, among our JCAT, the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force, among the 19 countries, only 10 have a proper legal framework to open these kind of investigations against platform. And these investigations are usually taking an average time of like 2 years to move forward and to go for actual results and seizures of valuable amount of data. But this requires heavy resources and a lot of involvement. But again, it comes with very big gain, because first off, you remove again another service that they were using, whether it's a forum, whether it's, as mentioned, like a cryptocurrency platform that they were using to launder their funds, whether it's a stealer. And then this would potentially discourage them, but they would need to shift to something else. And on top of that, on the law enforcement side, you are having access now to a whole, let's say, new intelligence on all the customers of this platform. If we take the example of a cryptocurrency platform, the last one that got contributed to us after a seizure, you had 10 million customers that was using this platform, at least 10 million accounts. Some customer might have several accounts. So you would have criminal intelligence on these accounts that were used to launder money, and you would be able to provide to the law enforcement agencies where the money is going at the end and how to identify their targets. So that's why we really need to push for this, let's say, shift and to continue in this direction. And I think Diana highlighted it well in her comments.
Can I just interject there as well, Shah, because I think it's really important and interesting what Paul and Diana is saying now, because my sort of view on this as well, from coming from, you know, as part of a single team, but joining other teams internationally in Europol, we often had the mandate of, you know, finding out who did a specific crime. So the nearness to the victim dictated our mandate in a lot of ways, right? So if you had, say, an incident involving like a specific hospital or a governmental organization, then the mandate was, this is a few years back, the focus was really on finding the specific people who conducted that specific attack on that specific day. But what you're talking about and describing here, and what the graph is showing, is also an increased focus on all of the underlying enablers. And that could be hard, I think, in a lot of investigative teams to get that mandate, to get sort of the stakeholders involved to understand and make allowances for the team to actually target the underlying infrastructure, because, you know, how they laundered the money, that's pretty far from the minds of the people being directly affected by a cyber extortion attack, right? But it's really important that we work in that direction. So I think that's a very positive shift as well, from my view.
Maybe this is a good point. Thanks, Bjorn, for mentioning that. Something we've been wanting to ask you for a while, Paul, is how do companies like Orange Cyber Defense and the kinds of people, security professionals, practitioners, managers, what is required from them to support the work that you do? What sort of relationship are you looking for? What would your asks be?
I will reply to your question maybe with like 2 points of view. The one, like from my former position when I was head of the cyber operations department at the Citoyen of the Gendarmerie in France, and currently in my position at Europol. But first of all, for all the cybersecurity company and the remediation company, I would say that I would really encourage when you are in supporting remediation after a cyber extortion to directly encourage the victims to contact the law enforcement and to raise a complaint. There is a very big gap and a lack of evidence sharing when there is an attack. And there is an underreporting that unfortunately is playing in the favor of the threat actors. This is a first part, and this would come also with in the course of your remediation or let's say your investigations for let's say the victim to share with the law enforcement, the IOCs, because this would help a lot when it's still hot and up and running, to be able to seize infrastructure, to go like above the first layer of the attackers, and to actually move on in the investigation. So this is one part. And the second part, I would say also from Europol side, this is thanks to our new, let's say, regulation. We would be able actually to receive information directly from the private companies, any information that would help any, let's say, either new or ongoing investigation that are currently led by the member states. In a nutshell, I assume, for instance, if Orange Cyberdéfense is having valuable information for a specific country A, then by no means they would definitely just contact the law enforcement of this country. But when you have a visibility on a specific, for instance, exfiltration server, or if you have like any type of, let's say, information that might impact multiple countries at the same time, then the best case scenario would be to share this information to us through what we call the cyber intelligence gateway. And via this gateway, actually, would be able, because we have now the mandate to do so, to process the data, to make the relevant cross-check, and to enrich a report that will be shared with all the affected, let's say, law enforcement agencies. So this might really multiply the effect, and we'll be able to act directly on, let's say, an actual relevant piece of intelligence. That's, yeah, in a nutshell, the two main ways that I'm seeing in terms of collaboration.
Thank you, Paul. And maybe if I can just do a quick shout out, one of the places Orange Cyber Defense contributes is with the World Economic Forum on an initiative called the Atlas, which seeks to support law enforcement with intelligence tooling, training, etc. And Atlas supports corporate and private volunteers. So if you're interested in getting your hands dirty with a little bit of in open source intelligence work, then that's something to look at, the World Economic Forum's Atlas project.
Indeed, Atlas is already cooperating actively with us as well. We already received,
yes,
we are talking a lot with them. So yeah, I would definitely encourage that as well.
Thank you. We're running a little bit behind. So Diana, I want to jump over to this slide, which is a data set that you derived by studying the some of the information that was available about offenders from these law enforcement operations you analyzed. Can you share with us what we're looking at here and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. I also just saw a question, and that could go also within just explaining the data quickly. So the data is from 21 to 2025. We collected it by publicly announced law enforcement activities. Just to recap quickly for people who've maybe joined a bit later. So we collected different data points, and we were actually really interested to ask the question, who are the offenders? And I think, you plot the data and you see the age range and you wonder, okay, what does that actually mean? I think then it's really interesting to use theoretical frameworks that exist. So from my background in social science and criminology, we have something that's called ACC. So that's called the age crime curve. And it's kind of an empirical observation that criminal offending rises always sharply in adolescence, peaks in late teens, early 20s, and then declines over time. So you see the blue line on the screen, that's kind of the traditional ACC. And what makes it so interesting is actually that, you know, of course, there's so many different social science theories and, you know, probably in other fields as well, or of course in other fields. But this one actually has been very consistent over time, right? So the theory originates from the 1800s, and even in modern criminology, you know, in the 20th century, it's been found to still, you know, how do you say, it still persists, and that the shape of this crime curve barely changes, and barely changes across time, countries, cultures, and crime type. So it's actually one of the most consistently replicated theories in social science criminology that people actually agree on, which is not very often the case. So I think that's really cool from a theoretical point of view. And of course, just want to mention for the people in those bubbles that I'm in often in social science and theory, that of course there are slight changes that I want to acknowledge before I go into our findings. And those changes are that we sometimes see differences in crime level, and then that kind of impacts it, but not, we still see the same shape. So violent crimes have been going down, but it's still the same distribution in age. And then we do actually see a slight change these days, because we see a slight change into older ages, because we see that in our society today, we are way longer
People are
in
living
education.
longer.
Yeah,
Oh, education.
living longer, but also in education. So our adulthood is delayed, and we're
It's
longer
shifted.
in adolescence. We're longer dependent maybe of support systems, and then also within education. So then that age shifts a little bit. But what I think is really interesting with our findings is that we actually don't follow the traditional ACC. And what that actually means is that we're not dealing with nothing in that sense. We're actually dealing with grown individuals that have calculated their risk and that have outweighed, you know, the consequences. And that actually then is a rational choice. You know, that's another theory in criminology that I'm probably not allowed to go into due to time. But it shows that we're dealing with individuals that have made the choice to engage in these forms of crime. And I think it's also, for me, it's like really important because these individuals, they have had life experience, right? So they have lived a certain time, and they have hopefully learned about morals and laws, and they've had maybe professional careers, or, you know, had different jobs where you learn skills, right? Like different kinds of skills, like social skills, IT skills. They have professionalized in something. They've done project management, and those kind of skills are actually really important, you know, for this ecosystem.
And probably necessary, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
for this kind of highly organized, socially constructed crimes like cyber extortion.
exactly. And that those are the people that we're up against, and that is the finding, right? That
Well,
that shows the analysis.
yeah, I wanna come back to you on that, Diana. But Zora, the other figure which looks less surprising is the gender distribution. Just tell us what we're seeing there.
Yes, well, doesn't come as a surprise, I guess. But most individuals we have in our data set are males at 91%, and only 9% are females, which is interesting. But this is, once again, we have to be careful because it's a partial view. And this figure, this number, is actually perhaps something that people can see a parallel with IT professionals. So we also have in the IT professionals workforce majority of males and a minority of females. So we thought it was interesting also to see this in the cybercrime field. Yeah.
Paul, I wonder if I can bring you in there. You know, when we published this data originally with the Navigator, we got a message, or I noticed a comment from a very interesting journalist called Dissent Joe from databreaches.net. And he suggested that maybe our age curve looked different because there was less publicly reported, public reporting about incidents where the offender is young, is a minor. So I believe some of your demographic data looks similar to ours, and in some cases it looks a bit different. Is that right?
Yes, but again, I mean, I don't. I would not confirm or not which one would be the most accurate, because I think in both, let's say, parts we might have gaps to fill. Actually, ours again, and our the figures that I can provide would mainly come from, again, contribution of ongoing or past investigation that were contributed by the countries to us. So this might reflect what actually the law enforcement is seeing, but might not be the full picture, depending again on what is reporting to us, what is reported to us. We definitely face, and that was also one of my call, like we are facing an under, let's say, reporting of, let's say, attacks. So that's why we really need more complaints in every countries that would really help the law enforcement, let's say, on their side. But I would say that the tendency, the trends would be more or less, let's say, similar. We are seeing a huge spike in terms of, let's say, the cyber, let's say, offender between 25 and 35 years old, which is quite consistent with the figures that is provided at the moment. And I would say, without going too much into details, because again, these are sensitive information from things that were contributed from investigations. But yes, not surprisingly at all as well, the proportion, the gender balance is more or less, let's say, the same, even a bit less actually on our side. That's in a nutshell what I can, let's say, say.
Thanks, Paul. Diana, I want to lean into this a bit, because this really is one of the most interesting findings. So what you're suggesting is that, contrary to what we see in more traditional forms of crime, there is sort of an evolution of an actor who starts off young, potentially. And if we look at what they're being prosecuted for, the younger actors are being prosecuted for more technical, more bold, maybe exploratory actions. And then I suppose if they stay in crime, what you're saying then is that they evolve towards forms of crime that are that we have a reliable ROI, where the probability of being caught is lower and the probability of generating revenue is higher. And that is, of course, then coincidentally also exactly the kind of life stage in which you're capable of developing and maintaining these complex structures that are required to run these organizations. And that's, of course, would be a contributor to why these forms of crime then also persist, right? Because it's not just kids being naughty anymore.
Exactly.
And then I think you also mentioned that if you look at that across countries, then just tell us what you saw there, because that was very interesting.
Yeah, we just chatted about it. It's not part of the report, actually. I was just curious to see if because what you just mentioned is in the report. So we looked at criminal activity and age to just see, okay, who does what, and that's exactly what you just described. And then I did the same with nationality. And what I think I am finding, and we've just updated the data with, Q4, so we have more in now as we had when we wrote the report. And what we are seeing, I think, and that's something that we will dive deeper in, is that we see again, so the middle age or a bit older section, we see nationalities that kind of resemble nation states, that where we see serious forms of crimes, and the younger age we actually find more European or Western or English-speaking nationalities, which I have been reading reports about where it's actually explored and observed that we're not just facing nation state as actors any longer, but also homegrown threat actors here in the West.
Yeah, and we saw, for example, the Jaguar Land Rover incident, and similar to Marks and Spencer's in the UK, where those actors were Western, but also seemed to be deploying a very different tool set, both technically and criminally. Yeah. We could talk about this for hours, but I'm not allowed to. So I want to jump to another data set that we...
Just one question, sorry, there was just one question I saw about exactly
Yes.
this visualization. That was what is the scale, I think, on the
Yes, that's
particular of
correct.
this, if I understood correctly. So that's the count of individuals, count of offenders. And
Count
then
of
age.
offenders.
Mhm.
And of course, we didn't have offender demographics for every
Exactly, it's around
for every
200.
operation. Yeah,
Mhm.
218 if I recall. Zora, so this data we present every year in the Navigator and several times across the year, which is our count of victims of cybercrime, what we call observed victims, because we track these victim claims from the ransomware leak sites, data leak sites,
Yes.
and then we count them and enrich them and stuff. And the trend, is just disconcertingly upwards, unprecedented numbers again in 2025. Why do you think, what is the argument for why these numbers are going up like this?
We have a few ideas here with Diana when we look at this. The first one is we do see an increase in victims. We do see an increase in actors and brands that are operating within this ecosystem. But we also have read on different reports that the ransomware payments are down. So we need to figure out why, or at least try to understand this. So more victims doesn't mean necessarily more payouts. And I think these 2 points are correlated in a way that perhaps because threat actors do not get as much payout from the ransoms as they used to, then they have to hit more victims, right? To try to rebalance or compensate for this. We have also seen in our security navigator about the SciEx data that more smaller and medium-sized organizations are hit this year, 2025, compared to the previous years. We also know that this ecosystem is very volatile, so new groups come in and go. And also some groups disband and then rebrand, probably in order to hide their tracks so that law enforcement doesn't get their hands on them. And then last but not least, we also think that more groups might also just mean that more threat actors reuse the same playbooks. So nothing really new there.
Thanks, Zora. Paul, I wonder if I can ask you a question about this data set. This data set measures victims associated with ransomware as a service or cyber extortion brands, right? The likes of Lockbit and Keelan and those guys. That construct of a brand, like a named entity that runs its own data leak site and runs a group of affiliates and advertises what it's doing. How real is that concept? I mean, does it actually represent any kind of real structure? Is it worth monitoring these brands, and is it worth monitoring these claimed victims via the data leak sites? They tell us anything?
Well, my answer would be yes and no. Yes, because right now this is based on this brand as well. This is the current structure back in the different countries that are investigating this type of crime, where let's say all the investigation are gathered into. So you would have for a specific brand like one, let's say, investigation mainly dedicated on this. So you would have experts like investigators and technicians that would know, let's say, more in depth how this brand is functioning, how basically, let's say, the infrastructure, let's say, would be also for the payments, the dynamic, but there is some limit. So this part is really interesting, and we are still supporting this, let's say, these investigations, because this is one of the main, let's say, way of acquiring also, let's say, new data and new evidence based on the ongoing attacks. However, as we can see, and it was described already previously, they are, let's say, the affiliates are the one doing the attacks. And nowadays, they are really, let's say, using this brand. They are not, let's say, having a big allegiance to the brand. They are using it when they, let's say, seem that they have like a good opportunity for one specific over another. but then it creates a lot of overlaps of an affiliate using multiple, let's say, ransomware as a service at the same time. Then you would have the same affiliate popping out in multiple investigation. This is where actually it's becoming kind of a nightmare in terms of the confliction, because you would have several groups, including within the same countries, that are investigating the same persons in different cases without sometimes not knowing it. So this is our role at Europol, to do as much as possible the confliction. And we are actually now changing also and building a better framework that would be more focused also on the affiliate themselves. So we keep supporting the big cases against the ransomware as a service, because it's still needed, and this is also part of, let's say, the strategy when we speak about the takedown. But at the same time, when there is like a huge prolific affiliate that is popping out and that we can appoint as like high-value target, then this would be also like under a new specific framework, when we would be not focusing more on like the different activities of this brand as such, but more about the affiliate themselves.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's super interesting, and it's something we're very aware of as researchers also, that examining the brands is a little bit sometimes like a magician's hand. You know, we're looking there, but actually the action could be over there. So very interested to see what you managed to accomplish with that focusing on the affiliates. Incidentally, for people who are interested, not this year, but in our 2025 Navigator report, Diana published some very interesting research on what we call re-victimization, which is where we notice different brands taking credit for the same victim. And we're trying to figure out, you know, what that tells us, or what the dynamic there is. Perhaps we can come back to that later. Just to the attendees, thank you so much for staying with us so long. We are going to make some time for questions now, so please keep them coming. We'll try and answer them either directly, or we'll pose them to the panelists in the next few minutes. But before we do that, Bjorn, I wanted to ask a question to you, kind of more from a practitioner's perspective. So I know you painstakingly read all, 100 odd pages of the Navigator every year, including, I don't know how many reports you read on cyber extortion and the numbers and what they mean. What do you take from that to your clients? Like, what's the so what when you go to your customer and say, look, we've got this data, crime is growing and it's terrible. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I was afraid I was afraid you were gonna quiz me on this year's report because it is a pretty hefty report, right? It's almost 100 pages. So I think it's always a struggle, I think, to convert any sort of, if it's a threat intelligence report or if it's like a strategic security report like the Navigator, and for each individual sort of person responsible for security at a company or an organization that I talk to, it's hard for them to contextualize this. Well, what does this mean for me? Or the so what, as you said, Charles. And I don't have like a very clear-cut answer, unfortunately, but I would say part of it is, just insight for yourself as an individual to get background. I really like the themes that shape the year section for my own personal benefit, to just get my head around some of the stuff that's been happening in the recent months. But I also really like that we include a lot of numbers and statistics. I don't remember who said this in the group, but I'm definitely one of those people that appreciate hard facts and numbers, because that sort of strengthens your arguments, right? If you need to engage some stakeholders in your organization, I think it's a lot more important to be able to show some actual statistics, and we can show you where we got the statistics from. And it's not just like percentage increase, it's just the actual numbers. So I think it's pretty transparent in that regard. And that's a lot of the value for me that I actually use when I want to make certain points and findings like we've done here today. So I think numbers really do matter in that regard, and that's what you can find there as well. So, and again, it's a huge piece of content, but it's also designed, and correct me if I'm wrong from the team here, but it's also designed to be, you can just jump into the section of the report that interests you. You don't have to read it, from A to Z. You can jump into sections. So yeah, please have a look at it.
Thanks, Bjorn. Right, folks, we've got a number of questions in the chat, which I'm going to try and distribute to our panelists. Please keep them coming. As I mentioned, we will carry on past the end of the hour for about 10 minutes if there are additional questions. We've been asked to reshare the link, so there it is. I want to start with this one from Olivier. Olivier says, is asking, maybe this is a question for you and Zora, but I'd be interested in your view also, Paul. The sense that there's a tendency to move away from double extortion, which of course means encrypting the data, but then also applying other forms of pressure, like the threat of a data leak. A shift from that towards pure data breach, which he points out is maybe more complicated to defend against because it's not about the ransomware anymore. And of course more complicated to assess, right? Because now you don't know actually if there's ransomware or not. How do you know? How do you verify the claim of the actor? Is that a trend that we're seeing? Just throwing it out there, Diana, Zora, Paul. Is there a shift towards data-only extortion?
Yeah, I think we definitely see that trend because data extortion only. I mean, I think we've seen it actually for a few years already, but it might be increasing now because it's enough. It's already enough to have the goal of financial gain. So you still, or you earn already enough by just stealing data and not doing encryption any longer. Yeah, absolutely.
Paul, is that something that you'd say you're also seeing more data theft rather than
yeah, exactly. I
ransomware?
mean, this is something that we are seeing more and more. It has been also reflected in let's say next edition of our IOCTA that will be released. But basically, that's let's say again, as Diana mentioned, the value of the data itself now that has, justifies let's say almost this, and this would let's say doesn't require additional effort let's say for them. And yeah, right now we are seeing it's becoming like really let's say a gold for them. Data is basically everything, and protecting it would be really one of the key let's say in the future.
Paul, I'm going to stick with you if I may. We've got 4 very interesting questions from Raymond directed specifically at you. We've got about 3 minutes. I'm going to ask if you can try and cover these in 3 minutes, and then we'll go into our extended time. So the first question was, how does Interpol assess the evolution of cybercrime over the next few years, especially with the rise of AI-enabled attacks? How is Interpol?
You mean Interpol or Europol?
He said Interpol. I think he means Europol.
Okay, because...
yeah. Sorry, Raymond. Paul is from Europol. How does Europol assess the evolution of cybercrime, especially with regards to AI? Are you addressing the growth of cybercrime as a service ecosystem on the dark web? And I'm going to skip one question, and the third question would be, how do political tensions affect operational cooperation?
So very quickly then to maybe open the floor to new questions, but when it comes to AI, so 2 things. I mean, right now, to be fully transparent, because we had this discussion already internally actually last week, but this is, although it's closely monitored, and we have one team actually in our expertise unit that is monitoring, let's say, all the possibilities around, let's say, AI for the offenders. This is not something that we are seeing at the moment in the case contributed to Europol and that we are supporting. There was not, let's say, cases at the moment facilitated by AI. Doesn't mean that this is not going to come, but this is not what we saw so far. This is the first part. Although right now also we are exploring, but I guess like every law enforcement agency is doing it, how also maybe we can utilize better AI in order to support the investigation as well. So on both sides it's working. We are monitoring how they can utilize it, but at the same time we are exploring like opportunities to utilize it better in order to increase our capabilities.
It's the same as us, exactly. We have exactly the same position.
So this is the first question. The second one was, sorry, about...
how do you tackle, or how do you addressing cybercrime as a service?
Yeah. So again, right now we have different program. As mentioned, the shift towards from the vertical approach to the horizontal one, going after the facilitators and the enablers, and basically all the crime as a service platform. The idea for us, we have built a program also together with other countries to kind of identify the most used, let's say, platform. And we are either, let's say, pushing and incitating the countries to open cases, criminal cases against this platform, both to, let's say, seize the data sets related to this platform, but also to disrupt them. But at the same time as well to try to better coordinate and deconflict the cases that are against the facilitators and enablers. So there is really a big focus on that at the moment. And we will go for a next round actually this year. Let's see how the results will be.
Paul, and then a final question to wrap it up. Are your efforts exacerbated by changing political realities and geopolitical tensions?
The good thing actually with the law enforcement community at the moment is that although this may affect in the future, at the moment, everyone is more in a position of like wait and see, so to speak. But currently, it didn't affect, or we didn't see any changes in the way our cooperation is going between the different agencies. And even the JCAT includes several countries that are outside, let's say, EU. And right now, let's say this cooperation is still ongoing and well. So I cannot predict what will change in the future, but at least on the law enforcement side, everyone is still focused on the same goal, that is, let's say, going after the cyber criminals. And this is quite reassuring, to be honest.
Okay, well, that is good to hear. Okay, so that brings us to the end, everybody, of the official time we have allocated. If you do have to drop off, thank you so much for joining us. Please take a moment to download the Navigator. Please reach out if you have any further questions, and please stay tuned for more of these discussions on other topics that we cover in the Navigator. And just officially to everyone again, the panelists, and especially to you, Paul, joining us today, a special thank you, and Diana, to you, a special bon voyage as you set off on your journey for the next few months. As I said, you'll be missed, and we're looking forward to having you back again soon for more interesting conversations. So having said that, if to our guests, if you are able to stick around, there are a few more questions which we'll try and address in the next 7 or 8 minutes. And maybe also from Olivier, he poses or he makes the comment that we're observing more fake attacks, and he points out a NordVPN incident and even fake groups like Zero APT. Diana, Paul, Zora, is this something you have a perspective on?
Yeah, I can start. I was typing already an answer as well. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's also been around for a while as well, like to see fake groups popping up once in a while, which kind of, throws us off a little bit when we track it. It takes some time to realize that, hey, they're actually posting victims that are identical from other leak sites, for example. I think I've also seen Zero Apt or OApt, or however you pronounce it. I've seen that as well, that the security community already has, kind of broken the news that they are not real. I don't know why they do it. I think that was a question, like, what's the objective to do that? And I can only guess, it could be testing, it could be just messing around with the competitors, messing around with us. It's really difficult and adds more messiness for us, as researchers to have an overview.
Look, I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist on this. I think you'll know, and there's also a geopolitical view, which is that if you look at growing geopolitical tensions worldwide, then there is, I believe, a concerted effort to impose costs on adversary, on countries that you seem to be your adversary, and those costs can be imposed by technical means, by hacking something or leaking data or disrupting something. But they're just as effectively imposed, psychologically, via fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I think we're about to release a paper actually where we argue that maybe that's actually the primary goal, is to kind of, bombard on us with confusion, paralysis, distrust, etc. So time will tell, but I think that's one hypothesis. Diana, Paul unfortunately had to drop off, so you're in the hot seat. You and Zora are in the hot seat for this. The question is from Andre, and he says, look, the actual ransomware part of a cyber extortion incident is really the last part of a stage. In terms of the earlier stages, and maybe Vikas, you can weigh in on this also, are we seeing much use of LLMs and AIs, or maybe Bjorn, you could weigh in on this, much use of AIs and LLMs in those earlier stages, the social engineering components, initial access, deep fakes, etc.
I can start. I do think we will see big changes and improvements in social engineering, unfortunately. And Shai, we've been arguing in the past years that maybe the reason why we see English-speaking countries so present until now is language, right? Language barrier. And I think technology will overcome that very quickly, or has already actually. So new markets, so to say, new regions of the world are open for that. So yeah, I think technological improvements like that will unfortunately also translate into opportunity, right?
That they always do, yeah. Bjorn, any perspectives on how Gen AI is impacting the field?
It's there's a bit of a other part of that as well, because it seems to me that there's also some vested interest in sort of observing the first fully AI-driven compromise, right?
Yeah,
so there's been, I believe there was a single report published in November last year by Anthropic, and that was pretty controversial. I think Jan LeCun was out and criticized it pretty publicly, and a lot of other analysts, including our own CERT analysts, actually sort of were a bit skeptical to a lot of the claims being made there. And I think that's hugely interesting. It's not to say either or, but I think everybody's now really looking for some sort of signs that AI is coming to completely undermine a lot of our security systems. And I haven't really been convinced that that's the case. I haven't really seen any evidence to suggest it beyond and I can totally agree that the main challenge is in terms of volume and quality, right, on the social engineering aspect, and you can automate a lot of the boring stuff. They talked about using MCP to automate a lot of the boring stuff in terms of removing guardrails and stuff in the Claude model and other LLMs. So that's one aspect of it. And I think the other question to, the question being asked here from Andre is, I think that's really hard to see signs of. The threat actors using LLMs, because it's a bit like asking, do you see signs of threat actors using spreadsheets? Do you know what I mean? I think the way they're using it is a lot like we're using tools, right? So it's really hard to look at what tools they've used because we oftentimes are just left picking up the pieces after an impact. But I think it's a really interesting question, but I think it's really hard to gain insight of it on what we have now.
I personally think that AI in the hands of the attacker is almost a bit of a red herring. I think AI in the hands of our users is a much bigger problem. AI in the hands of our IT departments or our marketing department.
That's the AI as an attack surface, right? Which
AI is an attack surface.
You made that point as well, which is a third. So that's I think so too.
but that's maybe a topic for another webinar. I think we've got time for 2 more. So I want to ask you quickly, Zora, just to, if you could maybe elaborate on the comment that Diana made, that what an LLM does as a language tool is enable the threat actor to engage in different cultures, right? And I think one of the points we made this year in the Navigator is that, weirdly enough, cyber extortion as a crime actually requires the criminal to have a kind of an empathy with the victim, right? You have to understand, be able to understand the victim well enough to know what would be of value to them, so that you can actually leverage that for extortion. Are we seeing shifts in the data that suggest that victims from different cultures and countries are being increasingly impacted?
I believe we do. We actually see a lot more countries impacted by cyber extortion, for example. And well, one could say that part of the cyber extortion is to get someone to do something that they will regret eventually, which will lead to the rest of the process of the extortion. So we did see many more countries in different continents as well. So this was interesting. I do not have the right number right now, but I know that we wrote it in the Navigator in the respective chapter. So this was very interesting to see. So they reach broader. They also reach smaller companies as well, as I mentioned earlier. We do see shifts. It's not static. It's dynamic very much, and it evolves as technology goes as well. Yeah.
But of course, there could be many explanations for that, right? AI empowerment or enablement could be one, but I think it's
definitely. This does make it easier for us.
No, Diana, I'm going to leave the last question for you, and it goes all the way back to your offender age data. It's a question from Lars, who says, I'm just going to quote him. He says, is it not true that with age comes experience? And so the social engineering and pattern recognition is better developed for older people, I guess, than for the younger generation. And from that wouldn't that perspective explain the older offender bump in the curve? And then Vickers on the chat weighed in to say, although actually we see some of the more social engineering oriented actors being on the younger side, if you take someone like Scattered Spider as an example. Any thoughts on that?
I'm wondering if we're not saying the same thing, like, or does Lars mean then like even older ones? Because I think that's my argument, right? So we see actually older age range because, and it's more worrying because they have more life experience and they are better in things like social skills and IT skills and so on. So I'm not really sure what the question is, to be honest.
Well, I can throw in, Lars, if we haven't answered your question, hit us up by email. We'd be happy to contact, or on LinkedIn. I think there's an event running on LinkedIn. And the other interesting correlation, which we touched on earlier, just as a final point, is of course that the Scattered Spider nexus, who are allegedly Europeans, have really specialized in social engineering and sort of sophisticated forms of social engineering, not technically, but socially sophisticated forms of social engineering. And the one thing that sets them apart is that they're young. The other thing that sets them apart is that they're Western, which means I think they perhaps also have a kind of an empathy for, how businesses work, how customer support works, what sort of pressure, a help desk employee or a remote worker will be under. So I think there's a lot to unpack there that we maybe don't have full insight into. And we'll take that into another conversation also. But with that, folks, we really, really are out of time now. And so once again, to the attendees who've stayed with us, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your time. We know it's precious. Please take a moment to download the Navigator if you haven't had a chance and scan through it. Please stay in touch. We're all on LinkedIn and social media. Hit us up. To Paul, thank you, even though you've left. And then, of course, to Bjorn, to Diana, and Zora, Vickers and Rick in the background, Medina and France in the background. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.